Hey everyone, I'm here with Siqi Chen, the co-founder, CFO, and CEO of Runway. Thanks for joining us, Siqi.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
So I really want to hear more about what Runway does. You guys have an amazing site, but tell me in your words what you guys are up to.
Yeah, so we're building a finance platform, and the idea is instead of still having to have a spreadsheet that you maintain after buying a finance platform, it's something that makes it easier for you to think through your plans, understand how your business is running, and most importantly, make it understandable to all the other people that you work with, which is not true of spreadsheets and generally isn't true of any other finance platform you could buy.
So that's interesting. So you're not only kind of selling this to the people that are going to use it, but also you're trying to get this out to people that will then, the CFOs will share it with, right? Like the sales teams, the product teams, and stuff like that. Does that change how you build your product?
Yeah, my background is in consumer products, right? It's all about making it easy for anyone to pick up and use. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think applying that for enterprise software has been a fun experience because generally enterprise software is not perceived as something fun or interesting to use. And I think, particularly important in the domain that we work on because finance has traditionally not been accessible and understandable to people outside of the finance department and often even inside the finance department, which is
Yep.
interesting. But one of the things we say internally is finance is not about finance at all. Finance is about everything that happens in the company. And this is something that I learned firsthand running product at Zynga or operating my own companies, right? So if you're head of engineering, VP of product, or head of growth, you have your own spreadsheet model, probably.
Yeah.
And it models growth, right? Or like engineering costs, and they don't talk to the finance model, which is wild. And so if you can build something that everyone can use and understand, you have a much more detailed and accurate simulation of the business.
Do you have to, it's interesting because it's almost like you're changing people's behavior, right? Like they're not used to interacting with the model and stuff. So how does that affect the way you guys build and sell? Or are people ready for something like this?
Yeah, so that's kind of a chicken and the egg question at the meta
Yeah.
level, right? Do tools affect human behavior,
Hmm.
or do you build tools that conform to human behavior? And our belief is that it's a little of both, but it's probably underrated how much tools change human behavior. So the example I like to use is like Figma analytics, right? You think about Figma, it was used to be rude to look over the shoulder of a designer as they were working, right?
Sure.
That's a faux pas. And now you're an engineer, you're a business person, you're a CEO, and you can just be in Figma side by side with a designer and you
Sure.
collaborate designs, and that's considered okay. Like that's a dramatic change
Sure.
in cultural norms, right? And so if you think about the cultural norms of finance, finance is stereotyped as being very closed and very conservative in terms of like, oh, we don't want to share data and how the models work. The interesting thing is, even if you wanted to, you
Right.
can't because all the calculation on spreadsheet is done on front end. So there's no way to hide salaries. It's all or nothing.
Right. Right.
Right. So if you can build better tools, find green permissions, then you enable more sharing, which changes behavior. And so that's our belief, and that's how we're building the product.
That's awesome. Can you tell me a little bit about the founding story? Why did you decide to do this after working your career basically in consumer? Like what brought you to this problem?
Yeah, so one of it is a long-lived insecurity. So my background is technical, I majored in math, and I found myself thrust in the position of like being a founder, year out of college, and I have a Harvard MBA in my team, and so I was good at engineering and product, but I didn't know the first thing about business, and so that that sort of insecurity never really left me, even as I grown in my career. So when Postmates bought my second company, I was in a meeting one time, and someone said contribution margin. And I was like, what is that? And the answer is that's literally one of the metrics your team is responsible for. I said, great. But the direct trigger was I was appointed CEO of a company called Sandbox VR. 6 months before COVID hit. COVID did hit. And we're just doing like scenario planning on these Google Sheets for how long COVID is going to last and how much is that going to affect our company. And I just remember ending up with a dozen versions of that spreadsheet.
Right.
There were errors, they weren't in sync. And I just thought, my God, we have Figma, we have Notion, we have really great products today. Why is this the best thing we can do in finance? So that's what led to Runway.
It's funny because I'm thinking back to COVID and we did the same thing. And I have a Google sheet that's R1, R2, R3, R4, R5, R7, 8, 9. Same problem. And then someone goes in and touches a cell and the whole thing's broken. And you're like, how can I find it? Yeah, totally
Yeah,
feel it.
that's another reason why finance people don't want to share their structure, right? Someone might fat finger something. There's so
Yeah,
many of these details, and it's
right.
really because the tools aren't built for these use cases.
That makes a lot of sense. Um, so talk to me a little bit about what the big vision is. Everything works, you guys succeed over the next 5 years. What does the company look like? What have you accomplished by then?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a customer standpoint, and the world we want to live in is a designer or PM could go to the CEO or CFO and say, hey, if we work on this feature instead of that feature, here is how it's going to impact our margin and growth 2 years down the line.
Hmm.
Right? And like right now, these decisions are like mostly about, well, how many people are going to hire?
Right.
And what's our budget going to be? Right? And we call that accounting, but in the future. What finance really is about like understanding the causal drivers of the outcomes. And the causal drivers actually have more to do with your, say, product roadmap.
Right.
Or your engineering costs, right? And engineering, like your compute efficiency.
Right.
All of these other things that traditionally aren't captured in the details of the finance model. And we think in that world, everyone has a much higher understanding of their impact in the company, how they can drive the most impact. You move faster with more impact, you're more aligned. And I think that's a pretty big thing. And it should be competitively irresponsible for you to not be on Runway.
That makes sense. So tell me a little bit about, what's your pitch to candidates? Like, why is Runway a great place to work?
So we start with a mission and our values, right? So we value people who give a shit, raise the bar, create clarity. And these values are tied intricately with our mission. And our mission is to make business accessible, understandable to everyone. And we think that's a really big idea because we spend most of our waking hours at work in some way. And you can choose, and companies will love, I think somewhat foolishly, for people to just like be cogs of the machine.
Mhm.
But we think companies can run far more effectively and faster, and it'll be far more fulfilling at work if you can actually understand your role in it. And that's like, I think, somewhat of an evergreen idea. Even in an AGI world, you still have to work with other people at some point. And being able to organize that complexity and make it clear is very difficult and very fun and very impactful. So that's probably like the first reason. And the second reason is, well, for me personally, what I love is just going to work every day and working with the people that we get to work with. The amount of creativity and like just knowing you look left and look right and everybody cares about the same thing is enormously gratifying. And so everyone says you have a talented team and very, very smart. And I feel like that's the baseline, right? Like it's pretty likely they're going to work with like very smart people, but people who wake up every day who care about the mission and the same things that you do is incredibly powerful and motivating.
It's really interesting because I looked at your profiles of your teammates and a lot of them have had very impressive backgrounds. Like, what have you done to get people excited about coming to the platform? I mean, joining Runway. And a follow-up is like, I've seen a lot of people go from kind of managerial roles to IC roles, which I don't see as much at other companies. So could you tell me a little bit about that as well?
Yeah. Yeah, what I find interesting is I'm usually the last person to interview a candidate. I'm sort of like the last cultural defense or so. And what strikes me is by the time they get to me, they're already sold. And they're sold because of the interview process, all the other people they meet.
Mhm.
And what I really love is when they use the same words as our values kind of unknowingly. It's like, man, everyone seems like they really give a shit,
Right.
and it feels like they've built a lot of trust. And our values came from the words that our team was already using. It didn't come from me top down, like saying, here's the things I care about. We refresh our values, say, like, what are the things that actually make Runway special in the form of the words that people already use? And those were some of the words. And so I think a lot of it does come down to like people just being impressed by the people that they meet. And then, I close them or sell them in some way at the end, usually. So that's a big piece of it. And the other piece of it is like, we do look for relatively low ego people. So when we're smaller, we had VP of engineering and like fairly limited companies come to us and wanting to join us. And they wanted to do that because they really care about the mission, right? And it's okay that not everyone cares about, finance or models, but the people who do, they know that we really care about it and they want to work on that. And a great signal is they don't care what role they have. And that's sort of like a high level mental model I have in general about leadership is that like the people who most want to like manage are probably like the least, the people you want to manage least.
Sure.
Because they're doing it for the wrong reasons, right? It's like when everyone else wants this person to be a manager and like they kind of like almost don't want to do it, that's like probably a good sign, because they're able to lead without the role, without the title. And that's what you want. And we look for that pretty intentionally. And I think that's how we ended up with a team of, we have, I think, about half a dozen people who are senior executives of one company or another, and they're all ICs here.
And, you know, one of the things that I hear from a lot of companies is like, oh, yes, we must keep the bar high and we must keep our team strong. But there's another chicken egg problem here where it's like, you know, you have to have a strong team to attract a strong team. What do you attribute kind of to the early days of being able to do that, bringing on strong people? Was it that you've had a background? Is it your storytelling, which I think is top notch? Like, what are you doing here to kind of start that little seed of strong team?
I don't. So I like there's like the B players hire C players thing,
Sure.
and I feel like that may be like overrated. I think so. First of all, there's no doubt that having like great investors and having done it before and like being good at storytelling, all these different things will help you hire the best people that you can. Having a network, all these different things, for sure, right? Like your starting point is just going to be way higher. There's no doubt about that. But I think it is. I think though you can choose to. So one of our values is raise the bar, and as part of our interview process, we have two required questions, which is, will this person push you to become better? And second is, will this person attract even more exceptional candidates to Runway? And we want both questions to be yes. And so we call them the bar raising questions, because like want to make sure that like it's a small company, you can't hire actually the best people in most cases.
Sure.
Even I can't, right? Like just most companies, that's a default. But what you can choose to do is, as you build momentum, to increase that bar and hire better people. This is, I think, like this is the first articulated by Netflix, right? They want the average to increase.
Yep.
And as long as you have that model, it's okay. You know, I wouldn't like lower your bar by any means. You want to hire the best you possibly can, but obviously, often there's a cap to that.
Yep. Tell me a little bit about the values in particular. So you have a few, you know, the raising the bar, the giving a shit and stuff. How do you take these from like things you talk about to things that actually happen in practice? Because you're dealing with trade-offs every single day for these things. Tell me a little bit about that, how they work kind of day to day.
Yeah. Well, the great thing is we don't have to, you know, force this to happen. Like we had a different set of values originally, and they came from top down. And over time, like we would say them, but I realized like what we would operate against them, we wouldn't use those words. And so what we did when we refreshed our values a couple of years ago is we said like, what are people already saying? Because people do really enjoy working at Runway. What are they saying that makes Runway special and that we want to double down on? And that's how we ended up with these values. So it ends up not being a trade-off if these are the things that the team is already doing that you really, really value. And I think that's important because, you know, everyone, you know, when they start a company, you write down some values and then you say them, but like if oftentimes it doesn't get fully internalized and digested and used if you're not acting in accordance to it. Right. And so I find it really important that the values that we currently have, people are saying every day, and they already are, and it's like very internalized. And that comes from like not just a top-down point of view, but also from a bottoms-up point of view.
Did you have that like when it was kind of bottoms up? Were there things that were emerging that were like, hey, this is probably not going to be the most effective for us, or you know, there were things that maybe weren't emerging that you really wanted to add in, or was this like, hey, we're just taking what seems to be working really well and promoting that up?
I think it's important that values are actually like as minimally aspirational as possible, because when they're like aspirational and they're already doing it, like weakens like the realness of the rest of the values. It's like, well, we're not this, but we say we are, right. And so you can like refresh them. I think that is okay to do, but I think you want to use them as much as you can. And of course, like if there are like behaviors that you don't want, hopefully these aren't just behaviors that only I don't want. If that is true, that probably means we haven't hired well enough. But the behaviors people want generally are like behaviors that most of the team think is like undesired too. And so those are values that, you know, we try to not have or not be reflected in our values. So like the opposite of give a shit is definitely not a value. Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you all work? How does something go from kind of an idea or customer feedback out to like production code? What does that usually look like at Runway?
Yeah, it's evolved as our team has scaled. So now we're close to 50 people now. When we're around 10 people or so, our engineers will just be on every customer call because we didn't have that many customers.
Yep.
And we just like look, right? And they look at it and they would say, I built the thing. And generally today we have a customer success team, we have a product team, and design team. And so the interesting thing at Runway is that the only team that directly reports to me, like every member of it, is this customer success team. So like all the leadership team plus customer success is what I run. And that's interesting because they are the closest to the customer. They're on multiple customer calls, just like every day. And their feedback goes directly either to on-call if it's fairly urgent or a bug, or to a channel we call product feedback. And the bar for posting is like basically zero. Any kind of product feedback goes in there.
Yeah.
And our product team is responding to every single thing that's ever happened. Right. And a lot of that is training our LLM to see like what is most important, reprioritizing as needed. And in terms of in terms of a single engineer, we often have engineers just like seeing a thing and just deciding to do it. In fact, one of our salespeople is probably like like regularly, probably like once or twice a week that he's like submits a PR, Joe Sweeney. And so we also try to break down the walls between engineering and design and the other functions. Like usually don't see salespeople code in other organizations. We have that. I occasionally, when I have this spare bandwidth, try to submit some code, although I don't do that as often as I wish. And then we also have hackathons, which anyone can ship anything that they want. And we actually devote time past the hackathon to get things in a shippable state and ship as much as we can. And so it's a combination of like extremely customer obsessed and high ownership from the engineering team.
How do you think about that as like, your team gets bigger, the product roadmap might get a little bit more set, that engineers kind of jump in and solve things right away? Do you have to like balance kind of what you're doing as like a scheduled roadmap versus engineers jumping in? Or is that something that you're actively encouraging? Like, hey, engineer, if you see something that's really important, go do it type of stuff.
So we want to actively encourage it. I do think our weight on like engineers actively doing something probably is like a less than it was before.
I see.
So for sure that's happened. Yeah. However, what is also true is that like what tends to be different about the things that you just jump in on and the things that are scheduled is actually the size of things. Mm-hmm. So things are like relatively small, engineer like, can just jump on it. But there are some things they're working on because of complexity that can take like multiple months.
Right.
And so what we want is like no one at Runway on any team should look at the things we prioritize and says, that doesn't make sense to me. That order is like off. And I'm pretty proud, and I think like the vast majority of people at Runway will look at the roadmap and be like, this makes exact sense because exactly what we're seeing from customers. It's exactly like the most impactful thing. But then there are these like small things that pop up in real time.
Yeah.
And so we're still figuring out what the right pipe is. Generally, we're funneling the smaller things that pop dynamically into the on-call channel. And so the on-call is like traditionally is like, oh, something's down. Then like someone's going to jump on and try to fix it. But we have a broader view of it, which is that there is like some small thing that is a bug or something to complain about, and you're on call, then you can go fix the smaller things that are quite quick. And if there's a larger thing, then you divert it to the appropriate team.
You said something that I just wanted to, I'm curious about, which is this, you're training some LLM while you guys are responding to product feedback. Can you tell me more about that? It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, so this is what I learned from Shreyas Doshi from Stripe, right? And he runs a product sense course, which is the best course in the world ever.
I saw that. I actually signed up based on your recommendation on Twitter.
So one of the things that make that course so special and so effective is his pedagogy. And he explicitly couches learning as training an LLM. And that's like, he's like going to expose you to some things, and then you're going to like, generate your next token by speaking it out. And that's such a different way of learning than like memorizing some framework, like some principle. That's actually how we learn, right? Like when we're really good at a thing, our LLM could just like know what to do, what to say, create these connections. And so this product feedback channel, we can't address every single thing that happens, but we do read everything. Right. And through reading, we're developing this intuition of what is most important and impactful.
I see. That's really cool. Yeah, we started doing this thing where we record all the sales calls, we pipe it through like a summarizer so that the team can kind of read it, and then we take clips out. And it's been
That's great.
awesome. Yeah, it's great. So one of the things that I've noticed about you is you're an incredible storyteller. Like you see it on your website, you see it on Twitter, you see it even in your blog posts and stuff. Is this something that, this was just a superpower that you have, or is this something that you had to build over time as you were building companies?
I think I remember giving my first presentation in college, and I just remember working on it,
Yeah.
and I think it turned out pretty good. So I think there is some innate talent for sure, like there is across every domain, but it is 100% a learnable skill.
Yeah.
Just like product is and design is, right? Like you can have some noble natural talent, any of those things. But one of my mental models is that everything is everything. So you can look at every function, every discipline through the lens of any other discipline. So everything is product, everything is finance, everything is engineering. Like you can look at all those things through that lens. The useful thing about storytelling is that one of the lens I like to use is product. And developing good product is about empathy and creativity. And like, can you be in the mind of a user and walk them through what they're feeling at any given point in time? Can you think from first principles on what you're trying to do with this product?
Yeah.
And what are the key drivers of it? So if you're trying to get people to take action, then what are key drivers of it? And key drivers actually is not facts, it's emotion, right? And so a lot of this is like thinking through first principles. And thinking through first principles, by the way, is an engineering mindset, right? And so I don't think of storytelling, and I don't think of any particular discipline as a separate skill. You can look at it through the product and through the engineering lens, the psychology lens, and build something interesting.
Yeah, that's really cool. So tell me a little bit about how you all think about talent selection. So you had some really interesting interview questions that you had, or criteria that you're looking for. What are you doing these days to figure out, like, is this person going to fit our culture and be able to thrive at the company?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I want to say because
Sure.
like our interviews are like we have very specific questions that have
I
been
see.
refined. But I'll tell you generally what we look for. So obviously we have a technical screening, and that's a combination of like, well, can you write code? Are you smart? Can you work with people in a collaborative way, and all this stuff. So like that's like the actual work stuff. The cultural stuff is basically my interview, some of the hiring manager in the interview. And I think the thing that probably is beyond just like, okay, can we work with this person? Does feel good and all that. The thing that is really difficult to pin down, but probably the most important trait you want is this person high agency and have high self-awareness? And so, some of the questions that we try to ask are trying to pin that down. Like, how does this person respond to feedback that may feel unfair? Right? Like that is like one of the things we're trying to figure out. What is this person's relationship with their circumstances around them? In that, is their mental model that their outcomes are determined by external circumstances, or their outcomes are purely based on things that they have control over? And those are things that are difficult to figure out. But what we find is that you're actually usually either one or the other.
I see.
Because if you believe that your outcomes are externally determined, that is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's fine. And so is the other one. And so that one becomes relatively clear, but asking the right questions to figure that out is subtle.
I've heard high agency all the time from every startup that I talk to, but I haven't heard self-awareness as like a really important trait. For you guys, why is that so important?
That's a really good question, because I'll tell you this, there is not a person on the planet who would not say they're high agency.
Right.
Right?
Right.
That's why connecting self-awareness is so important.
Right.
Like when they say they're self-agency, that they have high agency, are they aware of what that means and whether they really are or not?
I see.
And so you have to have both.
I see. That's very interesting. What about this year? So what are you excited about this year for Runway? What are the big things that are kind of on the roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first full year we're actually going to be live, generally available, not just like awesome. A design partner sort of deal. And that's a big deal. And we're growing very rapidly, right? So, we tripled our revenue in the last 6 months alone.
Awesome.
And there's a lot to build. And our main problem is no one's really heard of us in finance. So if you ask finance people, name 3 FP&A platforms, we would not be any of the 3.
Right.
So there's an enormous amount of work to scale out the business. There's an enormous amount of work to make the product, frankly, like as fast as we want it to be, as like thinking and using it at the speed of thought. So a lot of performance engineering work that must be done. And then a lot of like very fun marketing campaigns so that people actually heard about us. So this is like sort of, if there is a hockey stick curve of the company, this is like at the crux of it. The turning point, which is kind of the most exciting time. You skip the 4 years of being heads down and getting someone to use your thing at all. And we're not at the huge scale where you can't make an impact. Like this is like probably the best time ever to work at Runway. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Well, that's awesome. You've been in the industry for a long time. You've started a bunch of companies. What have you brought to Runway that either you've learned over the many years of building, or maybe like you want to do differently this time around?
There's so much. I feel like, I have multiple executive coaches, and I feel like I learned a lot even the last 6 months. I mean, one of the things, and maybe two things that stick out in terms of experience. The first thing is, having worked with so many teams, what I really deeply understand is that in good cases or bad cases, what remains are the relationships with the people that you build, that you're building with. And I really care about that. I really care about working with great people and having other people work with great people too. And so that's more prominent than ever. So that's one. The second thing is, this really feels like a culmination of a lot of the different things I chose to work on. It's all been consumer products, but also I've operated companies that are large. And this is like a combination of both of those things. And in this case, it is both a fun product to build, but something of actual, like, measurable, real impact. And I really think the opportunity is, the addressable market is like every company on the planet, which is unusual. And it's such an underserved space. So the combination of fun plus like very visible business value is something new to me. I mostly focused on fun in the past. And now I realize that business value is actually really important. So yeah, those are probably the two things that come to mind first.
One question, just because I'm really curious, because we're a remote team. The current mindset of a lot of people is like we're all going back to the office if you're a small company, but you guys are still remote first, but you do have some hubs. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Like why stay, partially remote or remote first in this market?
Yeah, I will be absolutely transparent about that. I 100% regret not being.
Fair. That's fair.
So we had no choice though. We were founded in April of 2020, right? That's when the lockdowns were happening. There was no choice there. And we have tried everything to do the best we can. And like, it's good, right? Like we tried every virtual like office thing and none of them were good. They were all terrible. And so right now we make sure that everyone at least works in the same time zone. At least we do that, or at least like the same, rough time zone. So we have a lot of overlap. And so the way we solve that is we have hubs in New York and hubs in SF. We just actually got our first in-person office 2 weeks ago. Actually last week. So yeah. So now we have our own real office. We had a shared workspace before, and that's been great. And probably one of the more important things we do is we get together, everyone in person, 4 times a year. So the combination of that, we kind of make it work, but it would have just been better if we were in person.
That's fair.
So, but for us, our that ship has sailed.
Yeah, that's fair.
We can't just move everyone. They have kids and everything. So,
of course.
But yeah, I mean, we're at a point where we've made it work. But if I could do it, I would do it this way.
Totally fair. Before we go, anything else you want to kind of talk about Runway?
We are hiring. We are hiring across engineering, customer success, a bunch of different roles. And yeah, it's fairly urgent because we're growing. And I think the growth is going to accelerate. So check out runway.com.
Thanks, Siqi. Really awesome hearing about you, your career, and like the success of Runway. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Really enjoyed this.